Finally, justice is done. Nikolai Zlobin, Center of Global Research, Washington. Your last name is not very kind. Well, you do know a Dr. Evil, a TV show character. My wife sometimes calls me that. Your wife did a good job. Well, anyway, everything is learned in contrast. You've just said that. Everything is learned through contrast. You were surprised me a little bit today because, frankly speaking, I was expecting more sharp expressions from you. Well, my last name, unlike yours, sort of means we're going a certain way. Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Where are we going? Which way? Basically, I noticed that the way you describe the modern world, I absolutely agree with it. The power monopoly, injustice, attempts of pressure, manipulations, propaganda. But quite often in Washington, where I live, that's exactly how the Russian political life is described. A very similar picture, just for you to understand the contradictory viewpoints. My question is not even about that. My question is about, on September 11, 2021, I was in the United States, and I saw the United States change after that tragedy of 9/11. The United States became different. It became more strict, more hard. The tolerance level dropped. And everybody became huge patriots and admired the president. And the United States became more aggressive in its foreign policy and began to shut down the rest of the world from itself. Maybe I'm wrong, but please convince me and tell me that Russia has started repeating the US mistakes right now. Your rating is very high right now, which is great. But this fantastic patriotism observed in the country today, in my view, began to disintegrate be divided into the right patriotism and the wrong patriotism. Right patriotism is those who support you in everything that you do, and the wrong patriotism is people who are bold enough to criticize you and disagree with you. And some patriotism is expressed in a very dangerous nationalism that has been drastically growing in Russia, in my view. And at the same time, one thesis of your speech, I would like to try to argue with it. I think Russia became more closed to the rest of the world, more shut off from the rest of the world, not because the world is shutting down in Russia, but because Russia started doing something to close itself from the world. Like some exchange educational programs were abolished, and some NGOs were cut off from the funding, even though they were not involved in politics. They were not looking for foreign agents or registering double citizenship. A lot of things that I could bring up here, but those are the things that, in my view, witness to a certain trend. And I thought that the more Russia is integrated into the world and the world into Russia, the safer it would be. But now it seems to me that you made a different decision. The less Russia is integrated into the world and its civil society and so forth, the more Russia will feel safe. After 9/11, America proved that it has now less democracy, and I have a feeling that Russia has been having less democracy now as well. If I'm wrong, can you please convince me otherwise and tell me where I'm wrong?
First of all, whether Russia is shutting down or not. I already said in my statement, and I would like to reiterate, we are not going to shut ourselves off anyone. It is a fact that others are trying to isolate Russia from the rest of the world. That is true, and it's been actually publicly announced by your leaders. They say we'll punish Russia, Russia will pay, Russia will become a rogue state. But how do you address global issues jointly with such a rogue state? And I think those leaders actually are aware of this difficulty. Like I said, we are not going to shut ourselves off and isolate ourselves. We don't have that objective. That is dangerous. And those who seek to isolate Russia, I can tell them that is impossible. In the modern day world, that's impossible. Some 60 or 70 years ago, maybe that would have been possible, but not today. Such attempts will definitely be unsuccessful. And the sooner our counterparts come to embrace this reality, the better. As for the growing patriotism, the surge of patriotism in Russia, you've compared us to the United States. Well, that is true. There's the same reason. People feel danger. People sense danger. in the United States following 9/11, people felt that they were not protected well enough from a possible terrorist threat, and that made them bunch up, that made them consolidate against the U.S. government. And the U.S. government should have taken that responsibility with necessary reserve. Now, more than 10 years after the invasion in Iraq, after so many lives lost, we see the coalition about to quit, and what is going to happen to that country from now on is unclear. But one way or another, that was the reaction back then. Now, as for those NGOs and everything, this does not qualify as closing down the country. Why do you think so? That was mere protection. It was actually the United States who decided to ban certain organizations back in the 1930s to secure themselves against Nazis and propaganda. Why haven't they repealed that law since then? And I've given you examples that certain political activists are actually questioned, interrogated by certain American authorities under that law. We don't shut down NGOs that work with the U.S. or use their grants. If we're talking about humanitarian activities, if we're talking about education or healthcare, you told me some education exchange programs were shut down. The Russian government has just announced about the implementation of one such program. Maybe they did suffer some financial shortages, but we continue to invite foreign professors to work in Russian universities, including the universities in the Far East. We implement the system of grants when we have foreign faculty coming and spending several months or even up to a year working and teaching and researching in Russian universities, forming scientific teams. But we are against foreign governments financing political activism in Russia. Would that be actually allowed in the West? In the United States, international observers are not allowed to polling stations during the election. They face arrest and time in prison, even when they are stationed by the OSCE. One former political leader from Europe actually told me, how can you speak of democracy in the United States? You can't even participate in an election if you don't have several $1 billion there. What kind of democracy is that? And besides, you have this voting college, this electoral college system when electing a president, whereas in Russia it's a direct election. And once again, you know that this is the way our constitution is composed, that in the United States, the number of the electoral college can be actually less than the population, can be disproportionate to the population of the certain states in the United States. So there is no true democracy there. And you are trying to convince us that we are not. We do have some systemic shortcomings in Russia. We have inherited them. That's the legacy of our past history. But we will do away with them gradually. What we don't need is a revolution. We've had enough revolutions in the 20th century. We need evolution. I know about the criticism about Russia. I know this selection system for local authorities, but those are practices used in many countries that you do not consider non-democratic. We are trying to fine-tune our system. We have no intention to go back to our totalitarian past, not because we're afraid of something, about going back to the past, but simply because I'm convinced, and most importantly, the Russian public is convinced, that totalitarianism is a dead end. But there are very different instruments of democracy, and they need to be relevant to the present-day development of the world. Well, look at Afghanistan. They've just had an election. I hope it will be all right. Your Department of State actually came there to manage the election election process, and he tells them what to do during while counting the ballots. Is that democracy? That's just nonsense. I remember people citing Afghanistan as a role model of democratization to me. That is just laughable. Or it would have been laughable were it not so alarming and sad, really. And we're ready to change our laws. You just brought up NGOs, that some of them were actually curtailed, even though they were not involved in politics. That is a mistake, and we need to redeem that mistake. And as for nationalism, you know, how patriotism can lead to nationalism, and I agree with you, that is a dangerous trend. And we generally need to be aware of that and conscious of that, and we need to do everything to prevent that. That is dangerous for a nation. I am the biggest nationalist in Russia, but I believe the correct type of nationalism is when you align your policies so that they would benefit your country, your people. But if nationalism is interpreted as chauvinism, as lack of tolerance for others, that will only serve to take our country apart. We are originally a diverse, multi-ethnic, multi-religion nation, and we'll do everything to avoid going the path of nationalism.
I'm afraid we're now going to have to wind up, and I apologize to